From Labradoodles to Cronuts, the world loves a hybrid. So today, businesses are taking a smarter hybrid cloud approach using the tools, platform, and expertise of IBM. The world is going hybrid with IBM. Visit ibm.com/hybridcloud.
Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast, sponsored by Lono Coffee. Visit lonocoffee.com, use promo code COFFEE2020 for a discount. You're going to get spoiled, folks. Another victory podcast. That's 4 in a row. I'm joined by Les Carpenter from the Washington Post to discuss the 23-15 win over the San Francisco 49ers. We go over everything from Ron Rivera to Chase Young, Dwayne Haskins, and more. What does it all mean? I share a few observations too. By the way, if you missed my interview with Ron Rivera last week, I'd suggest going back and listening. He was emotional about his cancer treatments. It was fascinating to hear him talk about it. Also this week, I'll have on John Riggins and Mina Kimes on different episodes. And don't forget to check out my work on ESPN.com. Of course, I have a story up now about Washington being in first place in the NFC East. There will be more throughout the week. You can follow Les Carpenter on Twitter at Les Carpenter. Before I play my conversation with Les, here are a couple thoughts. Pretty much any time I talked about Washington in the offseason, I'd always say they're going to struggle early and the key will be how they finish. I anticipated them playing better in the second half of the year. I did not anticipate them getting to 6-7 with a massive shot at winning the division, being in the driver's seat to win the division. But I did figure they would play better. It was natural. First year in a new system, young team. They needed to mature. Think of how much time Ron Rivera had to miss because of cancer. Yes, everybody saw him on the sideline, but you didn't see him at the facility after a certain time during the day. He was gone around 5 or 6. No NFL head coach can do that and expect to have great success on the field. Since he's, especially in this situation, since he's been done with his treatments, he's more active, more engaged in practice, bounces from group to group, is hands-on when necessary, whether it's visiting with linebackers, defensive line, offensive line, whatever. Is that the reason for the 4-game streak? No, but it is something that helps. But it's all why I felt they'd finish strong. I felt 6-10 would be the record because you looked at the second half of the year, and at the time when you're making predictions, it looked daunting. Now you have to think they can get to 8-8. Maybe they can get to 9-7. They upset Seattle. The bottom line is, though, they've put themselves in a great position. It's funny because I think some people, especially a few weeks ago, would love to have seen them maybe not make the playoffs and get the higher draft pick. Sure, they need a QB of the future, but man, I'd much rather see them showing the growth and resolve that they have in the last month. That's how you build a winning culture, not by going, let's say, 5-27 over a 2-year span. All that means is that you have a ton of work to do. Sure, yes, they need a quarterback of the future, but there are plenty of ways to get one. Seattle went 7-9 in 2010, 7-9 in 11, drafted Russell Wilson, then they're a playoff team in 2012. They had the bones of a championship team in place. Then they got their quarterback. They got lucky because he was a third-round pick, but they also liked him a lot. And that's the team he joined as, a third-round pick. If you think the only way to get a good quarterback or to build a good team is by finishing in the top 2 of the draft a couple years in a row, I suggest looking at teams and quarterbacks around the league and where those quarterbacks were drafted. What we're seeing now is a professional coach that has a team headed in the right direction. We've seen glimpses of the right direction in the past here, and it hasn't finished it off. All we can tell you is where they're at right now. Yes, we know, I know that there are issues with the owner, but right now they're going in the right direction. Where it goes after this year, who knows? But this is the kind of start you want if you're a new coach. Building momentum at the end of the year. You have a roster of players that really likes playing for you. To win, it takes mentality and the right players. If Washington had gone 3-13, you'd need a whole lot more than just a quarterback. And even then, a 3-13 mark might not have gotten them in position to even draft the quarterback that they like. Don't assume that they can just take one of the next best ones at that spot because the narrative is that, well, Zach Wilson's the third best or Trey Lance. They might not like them enough to take them. So you can't just assume that. You build with young talent and look at the players who have contributed here in a big way this season. Chase Young, Montez Sweat, Deron Payne, Jonathan Allen, Cam Curl, Antonio Gibson, Terry McLaurin, Tim Settle, etc. Then you have others who at times look good and could be good, like Cole Holcomb. I'd put guys like Logan Thomas and J.D. McKissick in there too. Kendall Fuller is still a young player. The point is there's a good young base to build around, something I felt was the case entering the season. But if they had stumbled to the finish line, you would not be singing the praises of this group or the group that put them together. To develop, you need to play and win. That is what Washington is doing. Les and I will get into a whole lot more, so I don't want to waste your time. So after this break, I'll be back with Les Carpenter. We go in depth on Chase Young as we compare him to other top rookies we've seen here. There's really only one legitimate comparison.
Hey everybody, it's Elaine Welteroth, and I'm hosting a new podcast called Built to Last by American Express, where we will dive deep into the stories, history, and continued legacy of small businesses that shape American culture. Our debut season will focus on Black-owned small businesses that need our support now more than ever. In each episode, we feature the story of a Black business trailblazer that has inspired a modern Black-owned business. First up is Pinky Cole of Atlanta's food truck turned restaurant, Slutty Vegan. We'll also chat with Hanifa Mwemba, the cutting-edge designer behind the Hanifa 3D digital fashion show. Plus, we'll check in with Issa Rae, our modern-day Renaissance woman. We hope that it encourages all of our listeners to support these businesses as well as the Black-owned businesses in your own communities. Tune in for these amazing stories and others on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
You've heard me talking about Lono Coffee for a couple months now. Let me tell you a little bit about who they are and what they're about. Lono Coffee is based in the Shenandoah Valley, just a nice bunch of people who are open for business during this trying time. Just look at their website, lonocoffee.com, and what do they highlight? Their core values of quality, family, transparency. They work with co-op farmers from all over the world to source their beans. They also support small farmers to find the right beans. During this pandemic, one of my saving graces has been grinding my beans from Lono Coffee and taking a few minutes before the day to savor the coffee, get my mind right. Put a little jazz or Frank Sinatra or Louis Armstrong on in the background, it's even better. I've enjoyed all their blends, but among my favorites, the Ethiopian Guji, love the berry flavor, the Mexican Chiapas, and their house blend. Start your day off right with Lono Coffee. Visit lonocoffee.com, that's LONEOAK coffee.com. Use promo code COFFEE2020 for a discount. You can thank me later. Welcome back. Now here's my conversation with the Washington Post, Les Carpenter. Well, Les, I'm going to take you back a few weeks ago. I think it was about 4 weeks ago when you and I were talking, and I said, Les, they're going to go on a 4-game run. I don't know if you remember that, but I do remember saying something like that. And if nobody can prove that I didn't. So here we are.
I thought you were really, I fear you were high on Lono Coffee at the time. And you never thought, look, I don't think any of us could have.
No, of course not.
4-game winning streak. Right? But the thing I will say about this, you look at Ron Rivera's teams in Carolina, and they always played very well there at this time of year. There were always these runs. I know we've talked about this before. I think we've probably both written about it a lot.
Yep, and we did talk about it. Yep.
They were very, very good second half teams. They were very good, like into November, beginning of December teams. And I remember thinking that before the season started, with all that was going on and the fact that they didn't have any time to, in the OTAs and a weird training camp and all that there would probably be some games early in the year that they should have won, but they'd lose. And then they would be a lot better at the end of the year. The problem was that there was always this gigantic stretch of 3 games where you were at Dallas, at Pittsburgh, and at San Francisco, and who thought you'd go through
Seattle.
those? Yeah, and then I got this home game against Seattle. But these 3 road games, I always thought were, the impediment that I just couldn't see this team getting around. No matter how much better they were playing in November or whatever it was, I just didn't see how you were going to go on the road to Dallas and Pittsburgh and San Francisco and win. And then they did.
It's funny too, because I think probably I don't know if we actually did talk about this, but my feeling always was that they were going to be a second half team because it was not set up for them to have success in the first half, given all that happened, given a young quarterback, new coaching staff, young team, etc. But I thought like they played better in the second half. I'm like, but where are they going to get the wins? Because you looked at the schedule at the early part of the year, and I'm a believer too, is you can't, it's always when you play somebody is when it matters. You can look at the schedule in April, but that San Francisco team in April looks a lot different than it does now. But still, you still got to go out there and do it. So it was hard to see where are they going to get those wins. So, but when did you start to see they are developing a Ron Rivera type mentality out there?
To me, if I had to pinpoint a game, I think it was Dallas. The turning point obviously was the Cincinnati game the week before. I always look back, and I hate to even talk about this because you never want to talk about something in a positive sense of being somebody's injury, and what happened to Joe Burrow was horrible, and listening to his screams in the stadium and all of that, it was terrible. But the fact that they took advantage of that situation and won that game said, well, that's what you do in the NFL. Right. How many times has that happened to Washington? And so you started to get an inkling of, well, maybe this team's kind of getting it a little bit, but it was Cincinnati. And while, yes, Dallas has certainly had its struggles this year, that was a road game. That was a high-profile game, a big game, a TV game. And, you could see, that defense is starting to play a little more confident. That week before gave them a little bit more confidence in this game. You start to see that those linebackers that were hesitant before weren't hesitant anymore, and that defensive front was really starting to surge. You were starting to see all of that. And then Alex Smith kind of was stabilizing the offense. And so, to me, I always think the Dallas game was the one that said, okay, this is starting to be the team that I think they were imagining. But who thought, okay, they're going to Pittsburgh the next week. That's not going to work out. And at the time, we still thought this game was going to be in San Francisco. And I don't care where it is. It's still a road game, and you still win it.
It is. And, it's funny because I actually think that the way not having fans at games has helped this team. And whether it was early in the year, allowing them to go through growing pains without fans at the stadium, getting on them. And I think going on the road in this situation and being able to just go out and play. You don't have to worry about anything other than playing. And I wonder how much that has maybe worked to their advantage.
I think so. The Dallas game was really the only one where there was a significant crowd noise. There was a little bit in Cleveland, but
6,000 people.
Stadium. Yeah, and Dallas was the one where there was a lot of people, and it was, sort of that, it's not fully enclosed because the roof was open that day, but it's still well enclosed. And, that's a place where if you thought the noise was going to kind of come down and affect them. And I thought there was a couple moments where it got loud, and it didn't. But you're right. I mean, this was, Pittsburgh's a perfect example. Outside of this very loud horn they blow on third downs there was no noise at all. I mean, Washington pulled this great. I remember thinking to myself the oddity of sitting in the stadium in a press box with basically about 30 people and realizing we were about the only 30 people that got to see this huge upset live. And the same thing today. This place was even emptier and there was, I think, 200 people in the stands that were friends of family of 49er people. They just got swallowed up in this place, and it was just dead silence. And here's all this, these kind of dramatic moments, and they're just happening in a vacuum. And it's weird because you've been on the road to these games. You know what these stadiums are like. You know what it's like when you're starting to fall. You might be holding a precarious lead in the second half, and the home team is driving, and there's noise, and a quarterback might rattle like Dwayne Haskins might in that situation, but doesn't because there's no noise to upset him. It's a very strange year, and it's in the back of my head. I've been kind of wondering, what's it going to be like next year for this team? They have this big kind of breakthrough in the second half of the season, and maybe they win the division, whatever it is. What happens when they go back into a stadium with noise? I mean, what's that going to be like? I think that's going to be jarring.
With Chase Young, the guy's been terrific, and he's made a lot of plays. Have you been surprised by anything he's done?
No, just because I think we were expecting that this was supposed to be, the once-a-generational player. And, you haven't seen the big sack numbers, and people have kind of made a deal out of that. There's always that one or two those one or two plays in a game, those moments where you really need the big play. Going back to the Cincinnati game, there was a big play late, when he made that stop at the, not late, but in the, the first half where he made that stop near the goal line. Yep. And then there was, each game there's been a play. There was a game in Pittsburgh where he literally pulled a running back from the goal line on that goal line stand. And so you've seen that these little moments, even ones where he's not the guy that is going to have anything to do with the play. He's not going to be able to get a sack or something, but he'll notice that there's going to be a screen all of a sudden, and he calls it out, and they're able to stop the play before it becomes something that's big. I mean, there's been these moments where he just seems like he's different than everybody else, both, in sort of how he approaches the game mentally and sees it, and how he plays and how he moves and everything else. And so, yeah, I think the breakout game was always going to be there. And then today, it just, the one moment Trent Williams comes out of the game, the one play he comes out and he absolutely blows up the tackle moves there and, thinks that he's not coming. And all of a sudden he just, barrels in. And, there were several moments today and he sees the ball on the ground, just picks it up and runs. He holds the ball like it's a toy. It's not even like it's a real ball. And there are so many moments where I feel like it's just a different guy out here. There's all these other guys and then there's this guy and he's just different.
And it's funny because he does look. I think when we watch him in training camps, like he just looks different out there compared to everybody else too. I think it's as much. I think the kid gets it because the plays that you talk about him making are plays that are savvy vet plays. I think that's what jumps out to me is that he makes plays that you would expect of a guy who's been in the NFL for several years. Those I expected big flash plays. But you're seeing 4 plays or so every game that he impacts just because he knew what was coming. And it might be an incomplete pass, but he made that play. There's no stat in that for him. That's what to me jumps out. I am just impressed with his preparation and how it plays out for him on the field.
Well, and the thing is these plays that we're talking about, these ones that he makes, that 2 or 3, whatever it is, every game that kind of stick in our minds that he makes, are often essential plays that absolutely at that moment have to be made. The goal line play in Cincinnati, the holding the guy from, scoring a touchdown in Pittsburgh. These things that come along are those 2 or 3 plays in a game that win you the game. I remember Chuck Knox used to have some line about, years and years ago, there's like 5 football plays a game and, you make 3 of those football plays, you win the football game, the way football coaches used to talk. And you kind of chuckle when you hear that, and yet fact is it's true. If there's those 5 plays on the field and Chase Young makes 2 of those or 3 of those, well, those might be the plays that win you the game. And, when we talk about special players, we talk about players that are just, different and better than all the others. That's really what we're talking about. We're talking about the guys who can not get the 4 sacks or 5 sacks or whatever it is in a game, but make those couple plays when you absolutely need that play.
Right.
And that's what's so great about it.
It is. And sometimes that play is just diagnosing a screen pass and preventing a guy from getting a first down because you were in the right spot. Or not even, you put yourself in a really good spot to stop a play. And those plays matter. I mean, that touchdown was terrific for him. And it's 7 points. It's hard to beat that. But those other plays add up too. And those are exactly right. Those are winning type plays. And plus, how many guys bring their mom into a press conference on their phone? Like he did, So
yeah, no, he definitely understands what being a star is about. He's a star. He just looks different. He dresses different. Yeah. When I talk about the players, I'm talking about in uniform. Everything he does is just a little different. And it just feels bigger, and it feels Washington has had good players over the years, and that's obviously not enough of them in recent years, but there have been very good players here. Maybe some will have Hall of Fame careers, but this guy I think might be the first real, true, genuine, huge star, kind of the Snyder era. That guy who's a legitimate all-pro for 5 years running or something like that, whatever it is. I feel like he is that guy if there's going to be one.
Yeah, and I think, I go back to guys like a Champ Bailey, for example, when he was first here. You just knew, this kid is different, and it's I think I'm watching the start of a Hall of Fame career. Now, I don't want to jump. That was after a couple of years with Champ, too. But with Chase Young, you see that kind of ability to go – Sean Taylor. to go down that path. I mean, Sean Taylor, and I should have brought him up first because he was different and he looked different. And, it took him a few years longer to, I think, put it all together. But, that trajectory was there. You just know I'm watching somebody who's different. And Sean was probably the last one, without a doubt, that you felt like that. And now Chase Young is that guy. But I think a lot of it just goes back to, it's not just the talent, it's the other stuff he does that he puts into it. That makes the difference.
Yeah, it's just, you're right. And it's completely different. And, when you talk about Sean Taylor, I'm starting to think that this defense kind of reminds me a little bit of that Greg Williams defense that Sean Taylor was on. It was kind of like, maybe the last little kind of run that this team has had, those 2 years and 2 out of 3 years that they went to the playoffs in the mid-aughts. And I see that a little bit at this defense. I see that same kind of physical, aggressive sort of style. And I wonder how much of that is these guys sort of feeding off of him and what he is. Is that, we've all thought this is what's helped Montez Sweat this year, but is that what's also helping the secondary? Is that what's also helping Cam Curl be the player that he is and has grown into? And some of these other guys that kind of come out of nowhere in the secondary, I kind of wonder, are they feeding off of that? Maybe that's too much, but I do feel like there is an impact because he is on the field.
Oh, and I agree with that. I also think like a guy like Montez Sweat, I think he was going to have a good year regardless. I think he's a good player, really good player. And I think the other thing with Cam Curl, I think it follows what Chase Young, who he is, because he's not as talented as a Chase Young, clearly. But I think it's the approach he takes is comparable, right? Because he's in the right spot. He does the right things. Maybe he's not as talented. Now today he was impactful, but he does a lot of the right things. So you put yourself in position. And then if a guy like Chase Young can force a bad play, or in that case, it was Ryan Kerrigan on the pass rush, then Cam Curl can pounce. But yeah, I think they all feed off one another. And especially a guy like Chase.
And that aggressiveness, that's what I like about Curl. That's what, I like about the Shazer Everett being out there in the secondary now. It's starting to be contagious. And you're starting to see everybody kind of play with that aggressiveness. And some of that, I'm sure, is just comfort. We talked about that they'd be a second-half team because they probably fit together a lot better. All those other things. Everyone's kind of getting what they're doing. They sort of settled into, this is who our season, who we are. This is what our season is. All those things. But I still think that there is a tone that has been set by Chase Young.
And I think that energy he brings, too, is infectious. There is no doubt about that. So I think you're right that there is with young guys comes energy, and that guy brings even more of it, because a lot of guys are young. It's not just even playing with energy, because a lot of guys aren't confident enough to assert themselves that way. This guy is.
Absolutely. And it's I think we both noticed it at training camp. What was it like? Within the first couple days, it was, what was that? They were doing there was a fourth down or something, and they gave the ball to Adrian Peterson, something like that, as I recall. There was a handoff to Adrian Peterson, and he just flew out of nowhere and just slammed Adrian Peterson to the ground. Yeah. And I think we all kind of went, oh, okay. I want to say that was within the first 3 or 4 days.
It was early.
And it kind of took your breath away and said, well, okay, this kid might be different. We heard he was different. We thought he was going to be different, but there's one thing between a first-round pick coming in and, and everyone's saying this is going to be the greatest thing, and actually seeing just the way that guy moves, the burst, the little things. Remember, he was hurt through a lot of that camp,
right?
And yet there was still, in watching him, you just knew there was something different.
Going back to the Rivera mentality with this team too, and how much what he went through obviously impacted this franchise and the team, but also now being back has an impact too, because I say being back full has an impact too. How much do you think that has helped during this stretch?
You mean you're talking about him being back health-wise?
Being back health-wise and full and being able to coach the way he wants to without having to be exhausted.
I think he talked about that. Like Detroit was the first time when he really felt like that. And I think it's a part of it, definitely. I also think that adversity early not just, we've talked about a lot of different things over the year, that this has been a crazy year off the field for this franchise and all the COVID and everything else and the restrictions of that have held things back. But the adversity of watching your coach go through cancer. And the game that always will stick in my mind is the Baltimore game when I just really didn't even know how he was even on the field and why he was there and what was going on. And, this is a day he just needed to go home, but he was still out there coaching. And what that did for those guys, I think that adversity and surviving it is immense.
Yeah.
And then to have him then come back full and be the guy that, he was going to be and the guy he really is, I think has allowed too this team to feel more comfortable and to have something inside of them, whatever that is, because they went through that adversity. So much of this game is about surviving adversity. Yeah. And that's kind of what he's about, and that's kind of what the idea when they talk about trying to find identity for this team. That kind of seems what it is, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Kind of survives and grinds and kind of chugs along.
Speaking of adversity, Dwayne Haskins got in there today, and for the first time since he was benched in Week 4, what did you make of his play?
I thought I thought he did what he needed to do. It was not a great performance. He missed some throws. There were even some balls that were caught. They weren't perfect throws. He looked at times a little rusty. Obviously kind of towards the end of the game, you're kind of holding your breath, especially when he almost had that interception. Yeah. But I do think overall he did what he had to do. He managed the game. And, it was interesting to see Rivera's reaction afterward. He seemed very happy with Haskins' play. And for a person who hasn't seemed very happy with Haskins, in recent weeks, that says that I think they felt like he was kind of listening and sort of took to heart some of the things that they had said that they wanted to see from him. And, I think they felt like maybe he was a little more prepared for this game than he had been for some of the ones when he started. That was the feeling I took from it. And
yeah.
Go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off there, Les. But yeah, I think that, listen, when you haven't played in a couple of months, it's hard to go in there and be sharp right away. And it's also, I will also say, Dwayne talked about some of the extra stuff he's been doing, but it's really hard to only start doing that stuff now and then expect to have instant results when you go back in, because there was a long way to go with that. So I don't want to make this case like he was doing this stuff. He comes in here and he wasn't great. And then that's just who he is. We still don't know. I mean, a lot of people aren't going to be happy with what he showed or have already given up on him. That's fine. But if he's doing all that work, it's going to take a long time for it to truly pay off. So yeah, today his main job was don't lose the game. And he did convert a couple throws in the first drive, got a field goal out of it, ran the ball well. But there's a long way to go with him. But if he has to go in there and play, do you think he'd be good enough to lead this team?
Well, that was the thing. I mean, I think a little bit of today was about leading. I kind of just finished writing something about this where, I sort of start the story by saying, that, kind of the feeling about this little run that the team has been that it all bases, it's all kind of predicated on how well does that right foot of Alex Smith hold up or that right leg. And today, suddenly, there was, that right leg, there's a problem. Right. And that thing that we've always kind of had in the back of our minds was suddenly there. And yet Haskins came in and, at least gave them a little bit of comfort that if you have to, you can play him. And it also maybe put a little bit of a thought in their minds as they look towards the future, because I still think maybe the way things have been headed, if Alex can kind of hold together, that Alex might be their short-term answer while they try and figure out a long-term solution, whether it's Dwayne or somebody else at quarterback, meaning next year that right. Alex could play that position. Now, maybe that gives you another thought about what you want to do next year. Maybe Dwayne's back in the picture a little more. I don't know. But I think today at least put a little bit of a thought in everybody's head of, okay, well, that's a step forward. Let's see where it goes.
And I think the things that we don't know at this point are things that you'd heard about them the first time, which is not always setting the protection rights, not always going through his reads the right way. That's stuff that you find out later when he's given some time to, when you know what I mean? Like there's still stuff that we don't know about his game. And because those are the things, like if he's handling that stuff right, then it's going to improve. If he wasn't handling that stuff right, then he has no future here, because it would have been the same mistakes that he got benched for. And we don't know that yet. It didn't look like he was making the wrong reads. It didn't seem like that. But those are the things that I'd be curious to know more of, because that gives us a fuller picture of what they might look at him for the future. Because we saw on the field, they know what is supposed to happen on those plays. And if he's handling that right, that to me is where he would have improved as much as whatever happened on the field today.
So, something Rivera said today, and I hadn't seen him use about Dwayne before, it was poise.
Right.
They had a ball on their 1 yard line, and there was some poise and how they handled that. And again, obviously, you're not trying to get a touchdown out of that. You're just trying to get off your 1 yard line. But I do think that there were, we'll see where it all goes. But I think I got a sense that they were happier. And I also think that, again, when we're looking at where this team goes this year, I think a lot of it's going to depend on Alex Smith's legs.
Sure.
And, then that's the worst in some ways happened today. Obviously, the worst would be that he couldn't play anymore. But the worst that had happened in terms of this game, he wasn't out there. And we saw that, Dwayne Haskins could still help him win the game.
Do you think this team, I mean, listen, they've won 4 in a row, 6 and 7. And it's funny because we've gone from a team in the NFC East might win with only 5 wins to now, like, you might get a team that's 500 or has a winning record that wins this division. Where do you think this team goes from here?
I don't know. It's a good question. I think, they're doing a good job of staying week to week. This coaching staff's done a good job of keeping them focused. The leaders on his team seems to have done a good job of keeping the other players focused. And I don't know where it goes. There are, I think we would look at the schedule and say there are 2 winnable games out of the remaining 3. I would also say that the last 3 games weren't things that looked winnable before. Right. So I don't know. I still always felt that whoever won this division would at least win it at 7 and 9, maybe 8 and 8, but 7 and 9. Someone would make that run. This is a team making the run now. You only need one to get to 7 and 9. That might be enough. I really don't know. They could beat Seattle next week and I wouldn't be surprised. They could also lose by 3 touchdowns to Seattle next week and I wouldn't be surprised. Right. Because it's Seattle. So I just, I think we just have to look at it right now as this is just something that just keeps going week to week and who knows where it goes.
And Les, like every time I think about this division, and we did an NFC East roundtable with my colleagues for ESPN last week, and all I keep coming back to is, do you really want to bet against a team that has a coach who fought and beat cancer during the season and has a quarterback who came back from what he did and is out there now? Do you really want to bet against that team? Now, things can go wrong, but like there just seems to be like we talked earlier, this would be my last question, but there does seem to be a mentality and a resolve that has developed just throughout everything they've gone through. And will that be enough?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, remember, too, they're a little healthier than a lot of other teams. I mean, they're a lot healthier. We'll see after the end of today because a lot of guys got hurt. But, right. I mean, they've won these games in the last few weeks against teams that have lost some key players. Now, Washington's lost key players for years now. Right. So, these things happen in football. You have to win the games when you're playing teams that are a little bit depleted. This was a depleted team today. But you still have to win that game. And so many times this team has not taken advantage of games like this in the past. And earlier this season, this team wasn't ready to take advantage of teams like that.
The Rams got swept by this team.
Yeah. And so, I really do think that, this Washington team has got a little bit more maturity, a little bit more understanding, a little bit more of an ability, and, knock on wood for them, health, that I think that, they could make a decent run here. Who knows? I think it's who knows? Who knows where it goes? But again, the hot teams in December are the teams that play well into January. We'll see where that goes.
Les, the twists and turns that you and I have covered the last couple of years are unbelievable. And this is another one. This is the first time, though, where it's actually a positive story to write about. So anyways, I appreciate your time. Have a safe flight back and thank you for coming on.
See you next week.
Hey, I'm Kat Lasso.
I'm Xavier Jernigan.
And I'm Speedy Mormon, and together we're the hosts of Spotify's new morning show, The Get Up.
Every day we're bringing you the biggest news stories and pop culture headlines.
Ooh, and the conversations you need to be in on.
Okay.
Don't worry, if you're not a morning person, we're doing the work for you. So just search The Get Up, hit play, and listen up for everything you need to know.
With a playlist made just for you.
Listen now for free, only on Spotify.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Les for joining me, and thank you for listening. You are being rewarded for your patience. And thanks to Lono Coffee for their continued support. I'll be back with another episode. I believe it'll either be Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, when I'll have a conversation with former Washington running back John Riggins. I'll talk to you next time.